Okay, so following on from the last video, I tried to use the final keyword with the properties within my product class. Now this is the result we get at the moment where everything's working. We can apply final to a method, just for a recap, essentially just to mean that we cannot redeclare this or override this this method. However, when we use final with properties, we get this fatal error and it says cannot declare property final. It's only available for methods and classes, and I demonstrate that in the last tutorial. Now in this video we're going to look at the constant or constant values within classes. Now it's extremely simple, and in this case it's a perfect example because we have the rate of VAT which we may want to declare as a constant. However, we'll then look at some of the problems that can arise with this as well. So if I want to create a constant, I'll use const, so C-O-N-S-T, and then I'll say VAT. Notice that we're omitting the $sign, and then I'll make this equal to a specific value. Okay, so now what I can do is I can replace VAT here. Now this is slightly trickier because by declaring a constant we now have to address this or use this variable, constant, slightly differently. We could, well, you'd think that we could say this and then VAT, or we could just, you might think we could just do VAT. However, both of these are wrong. Now if you think back to the scope resolution operator that we looked at, which looks like this, class name, 2 colons, and then property or method. It doesn't actually look like this, but this is where we define the class name, this is where we put the property or the method. This is essentially how we do it. You remember we saw parent, scope resolution operator, then the property name or the method name. In this case we're not going to do that. We're going to look at something slightly different, which is self, and this will refer to the current class. So self VAT will now mean that we can access this VAT constant, and it's always good practice to define constants if they are constant, obviously, so we can make use of them in that way. So now when we refresh we get exactly the same result. We could put the VAT up very slightly and we get varied results, so we know that this works now. Now the only problem with this is that when we go over to book, what we can actually do is we can say const VAT equals 0.05 here. So we've essentially overridden this. Now let's go ahead and look at the difference. So you can see that there's no difference. However, let's go ahead and let's override this this calculate product VAT, and let's check out the difference. And it's changed. Now if we, well, this is a bad example because we're overriding and we can prevent that. However, this constant value actually doesn't remain constant through inheritance. Obviously by inheritance I mean extending classes to make subclasses. So really it's not a constant value because wherever we define it, it can be overridden by a subclass. So there is another way around this, but we have to think about in terms of speed. So let's go ahead and just get rid of this here and keep this as it was. Now in PHP normally we can use define to define a value for a constant. So for example we could say define VAT, and then we'll define this as 0.20. And then in here we can just go ahead and, well, we'll get rid of this, we'll just comment it out for the moment. In here we can go ahead and we can say VAT, and then when we refresh we get exactly the same result because we've defined this as a global constant. Now this is slower than defining a constant within a class. So really when you're designing classes and you're thinking, well, do I want this constant to be overridden, you need to think about how you do you want to maintain the integrity of your class that much, or do you want to keep your application slightly faster? So really, in this case, the recommendation would be, even though we're demonstrating constants, would be not to use a constant, not to define a global constant, but just to apply the value within here, and then set this to final. And then you are unable to override the final where this value exists just hard coded in here, and that's what we call it, hard coding. So we can go ahead and we can define a constant if we know that somewhere down the line a developer or ourselves aren't going to override this value. So essentially that's constant values within classes, and a little bit of background on how we can do things differently, but in terms of this example we would be better off doing it this way. However, now you know how to define constants within classes.